to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights. And I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a private consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. You can check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there, and you can email me for a full list of reading options and a pricing list. And I also do tarot readings in case you are interested in tarot. And also, I have a membership section, and if you're interested to find out more about what the membership entails, again, you can look towards the video description. I will leave a short video there that explains what the membership section is about. And also, last but not least, I have a tarot channel, so if you're interested in tarot, go ahead and check it out. I will leave the link in the video description as well as in the pinned comment, so you can go ahead and check it out, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. So today's topic is, like I have said, as I have, announced on my community tab a while ago again. Sorry for the delay. The video is going to be on the synastry between Priyanka Chopra and Nick Jonas. Now, I have to admit that I cannot say that I know very much about them. I do know that she is an actress, that she was Miss World, and Nick Jonas is a singer. So they do have some very interesting elements in their synastry. They come from different backgrounds, different cultures, were born in different countries, faraway places, significant differences here. And also there's an age gap between them, right? They do have some things in common, though, as well, like they're both in the entertainment industry, all right? And it's really interesting to check out their synastry because it seems like there is an element of fatedness. So I have tried to, research their relationship a little bit. So they have been married, I think, for about 6 years now, 5-6 years. So it's interesting to note that Priyanka Chopra was, I think, about 34, 35 when she got married. And they have also had a child either this year or last year through the help of a surrogate. So these are some important points to take into account as I'm going to progress with the interpretation of the synastry. So right from the beginning, I have started with the synastry overlay. So within the inner circle here, you can see this is Priyanka's placements with the blue, and then on the outside, you can see Nick's placements in the red. So the inner circle is Priyanka Chopra's horoscope. The outer circle is Nick Jonas's horoscope. So it's going to be interesting to look at the different overlays that we have here. But before I get straight into the overlays, the synastry, the aspects, I want to take a second to look at each of their partner archetypes, because I think this is interesting. See, if we look at Priyanka Chopra's chart, she has Moon in the Ascendant in Taurus. She has the 7th house in Scorpio. And Scorpio, as you know, has 2 rulers, and those are Mars and Ketu. Now, Mars, the first ruler of the 7th house, is in the 5th house, and it's conjunct Saturn. And Ketu, which is the second lord, is in the 8th house. You can't see it here on the chart, but Ketu is always opposite Rahu. And Rahu is, as you can see, placed in the 2nd house there with the blue in between Mercury and Venus. So what I think this is interesting already right off the bat, because they have... First of all, because the Lord of the 7th house in the 8th house suggests that she will meet her partner in land, in potentially a foreign land, but also potentially, specifically in a land where a foreign language is spoken. That's what the 8th house signifies to a large extent. I have talked about this in, I'm pretty sure, multiple other videos. I did do a video that is specifically about, placements of the 7th house or placements of the different partner signifiers in houses and how it can show the circumstances around meeting the partner. So I thought this was really interesting off the bat. And another thing is that the ruler of the 7th house falling in the 5th house, which is Mars, shows a love marriage, right? So, and this is really interesting in her case because she actually comes from an Indian background, and in her culture, it's still quite common to have arranged marriages, right? So again, for those of you who don't know, love marriage aspects are aspects that particularly show that you are meant to marry someone that, well, basically it shows the traditional Western ideal of a marriage, meaning you meet with the person, you develop a relationship, it starts to progress in intensity and seriousness, you fall in love, you date, and then you take it naturally to the next step, which would be marriage, right? But in many places of the world, that's not how it happens, right? There are still arranged marriages in many places. And in Vedic astrology, if you have these love marriage aspects, out of which the Lord of the 7th house being connected to the 5th house, or any kind of connection actually between the 5th and 7th houses, either with the lords or the Lord of one of them is placed in the other house, different combinations, or the Lord of the 7th and the 5th are conjunct in a different house together. Any kind of combination like this is a strong indicator of a love marriage. So that shows that it would have been a very unlikely situation that she would have gotten into an arranged marriage. And even if she would have been, pushed towards an arranged marriage, it wouldn't have been successful. Because, again, I'm not going to get too much into details. I'm going to try to link the related videos about this because I'm pretty sure that I have talked about it in multiple videos, but I couldn't, right now I can't 100% remember, but I'm going to try to link all of the related videos in the video description, because I'm pretty sure that I talked about this before in some videos. All right. So this was interesting to notice. And also the fact that the Lord of the 7th is falling in the 5th house is interesting because, and not just that, it's conjunct Saturn, which is the Lord of her 10th house and the Lord of her 9th house. So this also suggests that when she meets her future spouse, which is what the 7th house Lord represents, that somehow it's going to be through the involvement of her professional sphere, and the 9th house shows foreign travel, foreign cultures, and faraway lands, okay? So again, this really seems to have matched in her situation. As far as I have read, they have met at some kind of an event together. I think they were introduced by mutual acquaintances or something like that. So that would definitely play out in this configuration of hers in the natal chart. Aside from that, what else you can see here is that she has the sun as the Darakaraka, so the planet with the lowest degree in her natal chart. So the sun as Darakaraka tends to show that the kind of spouse that she will attract, or that she, well, both attracts and is attracted to, is a very sun-dominant individual. And the sun, of course, rules things like entertainment, drama, art, any kind of creative activity. It also suggests a person with a royal sort of aura, right? Someone who has a certain level of reputation, a certain vitality, and also someone who is willing to play the traditional masculine role to a large extent. You know, the sun, in fact, to some extent, I would say that if you have the sun as Darakaraka, you almost kind of look for a father figure within a partner, especially if you are a woman. Not trying to offend anyone, not getting into daddy issues or anything, but let's be honest, I don't know actually what her background is with her father, honestly, if she's in a good relationship with the father or not. But in any case, sun as Darakaraka would suggest that you kind of want, that kind of a relationship, especially, like I stress this, especially as a woman, right? If you're a man, it's a little bit more complicated because society is going to probably frown upon your choice of partner. But generally, sun as Darakaraka shows you really want a partner who embodies that sun energy, that confidence, that leadership ability, that ability to take center stage, to be protective, to be someone that you can really rely on as well. Solid, strong, has traditional masculine qualities. All right, confident. Did I mention confident? Confident is really important. All right, so she has Sun as Darakaraka, so I think this would match, of course, marrying a very famous singer. And another thing that is interesting is that Ketu, being the ruler of her seventh house, the co-ruler of her seventh house, is opposite Mercury. So technically it's also, aspected, right? Even though Mercury is conjunct, and also Venus. Venus and Mercury are conjunct her Rahu in the second house. But subsequently, that means that Ketu is also aspected by Venus and Mercury. And this would tend to suggest a younger partner. And it's really interesting in her situation again. And again, I will be linking in a video in the video description, in this video description. I will be linking the link to a video that I've done a while ago where I talked about age differences in relationships. And I did talk about how, with the different configurations that are the most common there. But I specifically mentioned that if you have Mercury and Saturn aspecting somehow your partner archetype, it's kind of difficult to realize whether the partner is going to be younger or older. But generally when you see both of them, so it could go either ways. Either the person is going to date someone at first who is older and then they're going to date someone who's younger. Or it could be a person who maybe is physically younger, but they're very mature in mind. And, or the other way around, it could be a person who's older, but they're very youthful in their energy. They're very curious. They're very versatile and playful, kind of like that mercurial energy. So in her situation, I would definitely say that she has a partner, as far as I have noticed, who is physically younger, definitely. So he's 10 years younger than she is, but is also someone who's very mature and serious, right? This is the kind of partner that she would like, especially since, one of the rulers of her seventh house is conjunct Saturn. And also Saturn and Rahu both are aspecting the lords of her seventh house. So, and again, I've talked about this, Saturn tends to show a difference in age of at least 7 years. Rahu, especially when coupled with Mercury, like it is in this case, and or when it's coupled with Saturn, it tends to show a significant eyebrow-raising age difference sometimes, right? And or Rahu can also, of course, show foreign background, foreign ethnicity. And again, both of these themes are playing out with respect to her spouse, right? So the spouse is significantly younger and is also from a foreign background, a different culture. So these are important. These are interesting to look at. Now, looking at his situation, we see that his Darakaraka is Mercury. So this is getting a little bit complicated here. And it's really interesting because it's only like literally 1 minute arc difference between Mercury and Jupiter, right? So if Mercury would have been a little bit higher in degree, if Jupiter had been a little bit lower, then Jupiter would have been the Darakaraka. But it's not, right? Mercury is his Darakaraka, which is the planet with the lowest degree. And this is his wife archetype. So Mercury would suggest a person who is younger. So this is interesting here. And looking at his horoscope, Mercury is in Virgo, and it's actually conjunct Jupiter, right? So either way, whichever one of these would be the Darakaraka, clearly the spouse is influenced by Mercury and Jupiter. And also very widely, it's also conjunct Venus. But this would, this just looking at the Darakaraka, this would suggest that this person is going to be attracted to and or attract a younger partner, or a partner who is youthful. And also it's interesting to see that in both of their the respective horoscopes, you have Venus and Mercury influencing the Darakaraka. Either the Darakaraka or the Lord of the seventh house. So Venus and Mercury, both of them suggest youthfulness and beauty. So suggest that the partner is going to be attractive, right? which is obviously true for both of them. All right, but sticking to his horoscope here, and you can see his ascendant is in Cancer. It's marked with a red towards the outside of the circle. So he also has Saturn in the 7th house in Capricorn. So this is interesting to me, and it's also kind of a little bit of an eyebrow raiser because he got married relatively young. For those of you who don't know, I'm just gonna say it again here, that when you have Saturn in the 7th house, and actually when you have Cancer ascendant or Leo ascendant, and these are the two situations where Saturn will naturally rule the 7th house, these are situations where generally the person is going to take a while to find the right person. And in fact, it's not even recommended for people who have these configurations to get married young, because it's, might affect the longevity technically of the relationship. So it remains to be seen with respect to how this relationship is going to progress. Okay, I'm not trying to say that, oh my god, it's doomed and it's not going to last, because actually, just hold your thought, because I'm going to get to other areas of compatibility. They have really good compatibility in many ways. But it's interesting because this is a contradictory case to some extent, right? Because he has Saturn in the 7th house, so that would normally show a pretty delayed marriage. So normally, I would say with Saturn in the 7th, especially Capricorn falling on the 7th house as well, I would say this person would have to get married after the age of 30. It would be a good idea if they do that, in order to, again, establish longevity. In any case, irrespective of when this person gets married, Saturn in the 7th house suggests the partner is going to be older, right? Again, suggests an age difference of plus 7 years, and generally it's towards the older side, right? When you see Saturn in the 7th house, that tends to show an older spouse, unless there's like a stronger mercurial energy. So again, it's interesting in this case because he has that same mixture of strong Saturn and strong Mercury, on the other hand, influencing the partner archetype. And in this situation for him, it turned out to be that his spouse is the older, because if you look at it from an even closer perspective, you realize that Saturn is also the ruler of his 7th house. So he has stronger influence of Saturn than Mercury, even though Mercury is the Darakaraka, which is the planet with the lowest degree. And also Mercury as the Darakaraka would show that he sees his spouse as a friend. He needs good communication. Mercury conjunct Jupiter shows good relationship with the spouse, a very wise, helpful spouse figure. And of course, Venus implies that there's going to be beauty and sensuality that comes with the spouse, and also potentially an increase in wealth and an increase in overall happiness and prosperity. So yeah, that probably happened for him as well. I haven't done the full research, but I'm just guessing, looking at these configurations, that things have been looking up for him after they have gotten together, especially after they got married, right? So this was interesting to note, like on the surface here, about their spouse archetype. So on the surface, because again, this is not like a kind of a full partner archetype. By the way, I do, in my private options of readings, I do offer full partner archetype readings, and there I go way more in depth. I look into nakshatras, I also look into the navamsha a little bit, and I also look very importantly towards the Upaparalagna chart, which again is a topic that I have discussed more at length in a separate video. So I will be linking that in the video description if you want to find out more about it. This was just the introduction. Now let me get into the actual synastry, which is how their charts aspect one another. So, because we see a lot of strong aspects. The first one that really stands out to me is that his ascendant, let me check again. Is it his ascendant? Yes. So his ascendant is conjunct her sun in Cancer. This is a very strong placement for long-term relationships. This shows that they support one another. So her goals in life are matching his path in life. And they're really supporting one another. They can really help one another. She is boosting his energy. In fact, they're boosting one another's energy, right? So he's probably more like a supportive figure towards her, and she probably feels like he is going to support her destiny and her ultimate ideals in life, which is what the sun represents. And he's going to feel that she gives a lot of shine, a lot of increases, maybe even his social status, and brings a lot of vitality, a lot of energy, and a lot of happiness in his life. This is something that stands out. Another thing that is really standing out again, and this is also a little bit interesting because I'm going to get into why in a bit. You see that he has his Rahu in the 8th house in Sagittarius. Let me check again. Yeah. And so that means that his Ketu is in Gemini. And that means that, first of all, he has a Mars Ketu conjunction. So that's interesting. This shows that in many lifetimes are perfecting that Mars energy. So I can understand why she must have found him attractive, because this is a lot of masculine energy. And even though Ketu also brings this touch of kind of introversion and sensitivity and maybe even a lack of confidence, to be honest, but there is that undercurrent of this is a person who's really solid, really tough, because like Mars conjunct Ketu shows that this is someone who has perfected the Mars archetypes throughout many other reincarnations. So this shows a person who's very masculine, very much, ready to put on, ready to deal with conflict and to deal with crisis situations and all that stuff, all right? But aside from that, she has her Venus conjunct his Ketu and his Mars, right? And it's really interesting, actually. They have their Rahu and Ketu basically opposite, because she has her Rahu conjunct his Ketu. And so she has Venus and Mercury conjunct his Ketu, Mars conjunction. So this is a very strong karmic bond. It definitely suggests that this is, a relationship between two people who have known one another in a past life. In fact, I remember watching an interview, speaking of fatedness, it just hit me now, because I was trying to dig up a little bit of information on them. So I was watching these YouTube videos. And there was this one video where she was talking in an interview about how Nick Jonas had actually seen her on television when she won Miss World, and I don't know if he actually said anything about the situation. It's just that he remembered seeing her or something, or that her mother-in-law actually mentioned that they were watching Miss World and he saw his future wife on television. So it sounds really, really strange and very fated, basically, which would go hand in hand with all of these placements. Again, I have done a separate video about Mars, Rahu, or Ketu connections in Synastry. I've also done a separate video about Venus Ketu or Venus Rahu connections. Actually, I did two separate videos, one on Venus Ketu and one on Venus Rahu. And again, you can find them in my relationship playlist, and I will be linking that in the video description if you want to get more details about how these play out. But just to give you the short of it, if you have Venus Ketu conjunct, which they have in Synastry, this definitely suggests that in a past life they've had a romantic relationship. So it's interesting because I have mentioned in that video that with the Venus Ketu, it's actually seen in traditional Vedic interpretations to not be a good synastry aspect for compatibility, because Ketu diminishes everything that it touches over time. So Venus suggests, sensuality, love, affection, whatever, all this stuff, like, sugar, spice, and everything nice. Venus is all about hedonism, it's about romance. And it's also about femininity. So in her case, it's her femininity. So technically, when you have Ketu Venus conjunct, it tends to diminish all of the Venus energies as time goes by in this relationship. So this could mean that the longer they are together, maybe the less feminine she will become, or maybe his perception of her might be that she's becoming less feminine, who knows. And it's also like somehow the romance can get dimmer, and they could eventually get to a point where they lose interest, although I'm not I'm not saying that it's a deal breaker because, as I explained in that video, it's difficult to understand exactly how the karmic connection works out, because it could be like, Venus Ketu could show, for instance, two people who were in love in a past life, and for one reason or another, they could not be together, especially in the past, maybe the family separated them, very Romeo and Juliet, right? And somehow they always had that longing of being together and having a relationship, and they were not allowed to have it due to various circumstances. So that's kind of like the best case scenario. And my intuition is telling me this could be the case here, because it just seems like the whole thing was very fated and very unlikely to happen on so many levels. So it could be that, they had some kind of involvement romantically in a past life, but it didn't turn out to be like a full-blown marriage or married life. So now that they are in this life together, they have come to experience that in this lifetime. So in that case, it's very likely that this relationship will last for a very long time, especially since he also has his Mars conjunct Venus, which is a very strong aspect of passion, of compatibility, long-term compatibility, attraction, romantically and otherwise. And again, it doesn't surprise me that this appealed to her, because having Sun as Dara Karaka, she would have wanted a man to be really typically masculine and kind of swoop her off her feet. And you definitely get that energy when it's the man's Mars conjunct the woman's Venus, as you have in this situation. Something that's interesting, like Mars with Mercury could show an increase in arguments in the relationship. So I don't know what is going on there. Obviously, nobody can know what is going on in their private relationship. Mars and Mercury can show. And yeah, the more worrisome part, and this is where I was going to get, is the fact that she has Mars and Rahu conjunct. Now, I have done a separate video about Mars-Rahu conjunction in Synastry. So it's her Rahu and his Mars. And I did talk about how this aspect, in fact, either Mars-Rahu or Mars-Ketu in Synastry could lead to vicious arguments, even abuse. I'm pretty sure that I mentioned in that video that Johnny Depp and Amber Heard have the conjunction between Mars and Ketu, actually. And according to traditional texts, again, Mars and Ketu is actually the least worrisome of these aspects, because Ketu diminishes over time. So when you have Mars-Ketu conjunct, when the two people get together, that's the highest level of irritability that they will have with one another, or the highest level of disagreements and arguments that they will have with one another. But the longer they are together, the more they work through their anger issues. That's the theory. Whereas with Rahu, it's the opposite way. So it's like when they get together, they're at the lowest level of irritability, and it goes up from there. But again, considering the rest of the synastry aspects that are happening here, and especially once I get to the composite, you're going to see what I'm talking about. They probably have a very strong drive to be together, and there's definitely fatedness connected to this relationship. But I'm just saying that Mars-Rahu aspect could be problematic and cause arguments down the line. Hopefully not getting to the point of physical abuse, but only time will tell. Okay, so this is something that I noticed. And in fact, they have the double whammy. They have a double whammy Mars-Venus conjunction, because then you also see that his Venus is in Virgo, conjunct her Mars in Virgo, Mars-Saturn in the 5th house as well. And also her, Mars-Saturn, I'm really curious about what Priyanka Chopra's childhood must have looked like, because Mars-Saturn in the 5th house does not paint a pretty picture. It tends to show, actually Teal Swan has the same conjunction. I think I mentioned this in another video, that I used to know this guy who had this conjunction, and he was like in juvenile detention for killing someone in self-defense when he was like 14. Also came from a troubled background, an alcoholic father, etc. So Mars and Saturn, Saturn already in the 5th house is bad news. But if it's also with Mars, which is another malefic, this tends to show a pretty tough upbringing. I don't know what was going on there, so I don't know what the story is with her family, the relationship with her family. But in any case, it's two malefics in the fifth house, which, I mean, on the positive side, definitely in her case, this turned out to probably motivate her to put in a lot of her energy into creativity, into the arts, because the fifth house is all about creativity, about especially dramatic arts and entertainment and you know, all forms of creative expressions. And also, if you look at her horoscope, you see that Mars is the planet with the highest degree, which makes it her Atmakaraka. So definitely this shows that her destiny to a large extent is connected to that fifth house activity. So having his Venus, you know, here with Saturn and Mars is really sweetening up that whole combination. It's making it more bearable, more soft, digestible, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of like a soothing energy, you know, coming into that fifth house. And it's also, fifth house is also the house of children. And by the way, I'm not surprised that she had a child by surrogate, because having two malefics in the fifth house, I mean, again, Saturn in the fifth, by the way, is a stronger, it's probably actually one of the strongest signifiers of delay in marriage. And it not just delays marriage, because see, it's even worse than Saturn in the seventh house, actually. So it's really funny to me that he has Saturn in the seventh house and she has Saturn in the fifth house, because, you know, it explains why they would be drawn to one another, because these people have, like, probably similar mentalities towards relationships. Like, they both take relationships pretty seriously. I would say with her, it's even more so than with him, because, again, Saturn, think about it, the fifth house is not just marriage, it's relationships altogether. Right? So this implies, like, the courtship phase, the dating phase. You know, it also shows, like, children and childbearing, especially in, I mean, not just especially in a woman's chart, in a man's chart as well. Fifth house is children to a large extent, and Saturn sitting there is aspecting the seventh house as well by third aspect, which is a special aspect in Vedic astrology that Saturn makes. It's a single-sided aspect. So Saturn aspecting both the fifth and the seventh houses, this delays both romance and marriage and children. Actually, not so all three of them, not both, all three of them. So this would imply that she started dating late, that she would have children late, that she would also get married late. And on top of that, she also has Mars there in the fifth house, which would further sort of create problems, especially when it came to having children. You know, because it would further kind of create obstacles. And she ended up having a child through a surrogate. Now, you could argue, well, at her age, it was probably predictable that she would need some kind of help to conceive. Not necessarily. Some people, I mean, some women, they easily have children after the age of 40 even. And I don't think she was 40 when she started when she wanted to have children. And she tried for them. So clearly she has had some kind of fertility issues. And also this made me think of Teal Swan as well, because she also has this conjunction. And I remember reading in one of her books that she said she had a very traumatizing childbirth. Didn't give more details about it, but probably is the reason why she stopped having children after one. All right, just as a parenthesis. Okay, so this would explain why she got married at, I think, 34, 35, which, especially for someone who, I don't know, was Miss World and a beauty queen and very famous and successful, it's a pretty late marriage, you know? Yeah, so it would have been much worse if she also had other malefics happening, you know, aspecting her seventh house. So at least there was a silver lining. It happened, and it happened with the right partner. Yeah, so hopefully all will be well. And let's see what else I see in Synastry. This is interesting because they have, like, he has his Rahu in her 8th house. So this could show that once they get together, her relationship with, no, actually not, no. Her relationship, actually, yes, her relationship both with the family of origin and his family of origin could become more tense after they get married, or they could keep their distance from the families of origin after they get married. And Mars in the second house, falling in the second house, could really stimulate her desire for security, for wanting to invest in fixed assets, maybe get real estate. That could be a thing. Also, moon falling in the 12th could, like, his moon is falling in her 12th house. That shows, a strong psychic bond. Like, they could understand each other without even having to speak sometimes. Like, they complete each other's sentences. That could be a thing. And let me see what else. Also, his sun is falling in her 4th house, which is further enhancing that feeling of security that she probably gets from him. Because, 4th house is about the home base, stability, again, real estate, vehicles, stuff like that. So his sun falling in there, it shows that it will somehow increase her happiness with respect to getting more vehicles and having more support, and also could bring more joy and creativity into her life. Let me check something else. They also have a pretty wide moon Jupiter opposition. So her Jupiter is in Libra, his moon is in Aries. This would show a lot of goodwill emotionally, them feeling safe with one another, a lot of optimism between the two of them. Also more shared than oppositional beliefs with respect to family and motherhood and all that. Although with the opposition, there could also be differences, right? I mean, it doesn't surprise me that they would have this opposition because, again, they're coming from different cultures. So this could translate into some kind of a conflict between, in their relationship, there could be a conflict between her desire for expansion, maybe, or her ambition, and his desire for safety and comfort. Yes, that's how I would read it. And another thing to notice is that this is not ideal, but again, I don't want to jinx anything. This is not ideal, but he has his moon in Aries and she has her moon in Taurus. And again, this boils back to another video where I talked about the importance of the distance from the woman's moon to the man's moon, and or vice versa. And I said there that, again, this is coming from traditional Vedic astrology, that when the distance from the woman's moon to the man's moon is shorter than the other way around. So that means within 4 signs or less. And in fact, no, it means within 6 signs or less. All right. But the closer they are, the worse it is, technically. So in an ideal relationship, you want to see that the man's moon is in a lower degree than the woman's moon. And when I say lower degree, I'm talking considering the sign as well. So I'm talking about, think about the signs on the circle, right? And think about their natural order. So when you have a man's moon in Aries and her moon in Taurus, that means that when you try to get from her moon to his moon, you have to go through 12 signs to get to his moon, right? Because the natural order is Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, so on and so forth, until back to Taurus, right? And Aries would be the 12th sign from her moon. So in this situation, you could have a kind of dynamic where the woman feels not emotionally understood, sometimes maybe not even emotionally supported enough. Worst case scenario, and I've actually seen this, as I've mentioned in other videos, I've seen this in relationships where the distance between the woman's moon and the man's moon is shorter than the other way around, the woman starts to kind of baby the man. And it's not because she is going to feel more maternal towards him. It's because a lot of the times this shows that the man doesn't really understand his wife or partner. And that really spells trouble for the relationship, because women really want to feel understood, and women are generally more emotionally needy and more sensitive, right? So when you have this kind of configuration, it could be like the woman feels like she's the one who understands the man all the time, right? She's like always there to meet his needs emotionally and give him a shoulder to cry on, and is supportive and everything, but she might feel like she's not getting the same amount of support in exchange. So this could lead to this kind of a bit of a mother-son dynamic. So it's not a great thing to have for long-term compatibility. However, in today's world, depending on the situation especially, it could definitely work. I have seen long-term relationships with this combination, so I'm not saying that it's a deal breaker. I'm just simply saying, it could bring certain types of problems in their dynamics. And also, if you look at their nakshatras, again, my personal view, I know I've heard other people say, actually, I think most astrologers that I've come across pretty much agree that the most important nakshatra in compatibility is the moon nakshatra. However, this has been my personal observation based on my analysis over the years, that you also want to check the moon nakshatra of the navamsha, especially if the person, one of the people in the relationship, is past the age of 30, and even more so if they're past the age of 35. And Priyanka Chopra is, now she is, I think, 41. But when she got together with Nick Jonas, she was already in her early 30s. So it's really interesting to check their compatibility here with the nakshatra, because he has moon in Bharani nakshatra, and she has moon in Rohini nakshatra in the D1 charts. But if you look at her navamsha, she has moon in Punarvasu nakshatra, and Punarvasu and Bharani are actually even stronger in compatibility than Rohini and Bharani. It's great that they have both of them actually in compatibility. I haven't checked his navamsha actually. Okay, so I checked his navamsha as well just now, and he has moon in Hasta nakshatra in his D9 chart, and the compatibility between Hasta and Punarvasu is not that great. It's not as great as the compatibility between Punarvasu and Bharani nakshatra. So bear with me here. What I'm trying to say, and actually I did a whole video on this topic about how compatibility can change between partners when they reach a certain age, or when there is an age difference based on the moon nakshatra. I'm going to be linking that one in the video description as well if you want to check it out. I think I called it something about moon in Synastry and compatibility after the age of 35, something like that. And I talked about how, as we get older, we become our Navamsha chart, or the D9 divisional chart. So my theory, and I talked about this in the video, and I've seen this so many times in literally like every relationship that I have analyzed in depth for people that I've known, especially, and to see how their relationships kind of evolve over time. It's so obvious that there's something to this, that basically once you pass the age of 35 roughly, your Navamsha is fully activated, right? And in fact, once you get married, the Navamsha gets fully activated. So it's going to be interesting to see how this marriage progresses, okay? Basically this shows that it's important to check the nakshatra of the moon in the D9 as well, not just of the moon in the D1 chart, because you want to see compatibility all across the board. And as I mentioned in that video, there are situations where, let's say you date someone when you're both of you are in your 20s, early 20s, let's say, and you could have very compatible moon nakshatras and you get along great. But as time progresses, maybe you even get married, you start to see that you are having less and less in common, or you're starting to have more arguments with this person. And to a large extent, it could be because your moon nakshatras in the D9 are no longer compatible, right? And when you are looking at relationships that have an age gap like this one, you also want to see that the Navamsha, the moon, the Navamsha moon nakshatra of the older person is compatible to the natal moon nakshatra of the younger person, right? So that's what I've been trying to kind of express here. In any case, they do have overall good compatibility. It's just that as he gets older, they might start to have a bit more challenges, like the compatibility between his moon in the D9 and her moon in the D9 is not as great as between her moon in the D9 and his moon in the D1, right? And he is still relatively younger. Okay, so this is something that I noticed. This is interesting. His Saturn is falling in her 9th house, which to me kind of shows that it could be that she starts to feel somehow limited by him. Like maybe once they get together, she will have less of an opportunity for travel, or maybe she won't be as inclined to travel. But I think most likely it's going to feel more like a frustration. Like maybe she's going to feel like she can't travel as often once they are together in a solid married relationship. Also, looking at it from his perspective, the fact that her Venus and Mercury and Rahu are falling in his 12th house from the ascendant and conjunct his Mars, that shows a lot of bedroom activity there. Maybe a lot of bed pleasures, a lot of happiness and physical intimacy. Let me put it like that. And also, his Venus falls in the 3rd house from the ascendant, which actually shows a person who is not, and not just Venus, but his Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus are falling in the 3rd house from his ascendant. So this can show a person who is maybe not the most aggressive or driven person. So this can show that her Mars and Saturn falling in there somehow boosts his confidence and his bravery and encourages him, emboldens him, to pursue his desires and ambitions. Also, one thing that I wanted to say, but I don't think I mentioned it, is that having the Moon-Jupiter opposition also increases the chances of having children together. I think I mentioned that. I did mention this again in another video that I did where I talked about fertility-boosting aspects in Synastry. One thing that stands out to me, though, as a bit of a parenthesis, going back to Nick Jonas's natal chart here, he has Venus in Virgo. And again, I'm going back to another video that I did about Venus as the wife in the man's horoscope, and Venus in Virgo is considered in a way, well, actually not just considered in a way, it's actually debilitated. But especially when it comes to the topic of the wife archetype in a man's chart, Venus in Virgo is one of those placements that tends to bring frustration in a man's life. So it tends to show that there will always be some kind of dissatisfaction with respect to the wife archetype. Virgo, and I mentioned in that video especially that Virgo can show that the wife archetype somehow is frozen in time, because the Virgo energy is one of self-preservation. That's why it's associated with the virgin and chastity and stuff. So when Venus is in Virgo, it can show a wife that doesn't really grow with time, kind of seems to be stuck in a I don't know, chrysalis or something phase forever. And there could be frustrations on the part of the husband that she is maybe holding him back, or that she's just not growing as fast as he is. That could be a thing. So that would be interesting to see how this progresses, especially since they also have south node contacts. So, and south node contacts can also run the risk of making two people in a relationship feel like they're stuck in a rut and they're not really growing. It's interesting to see how this is going to progress. Just let me put it like that. But pretty much this is what I see from the synastry, the main themes that I see, honestly. Let me check another thing, actually. Wait a minute. Oh yeah, another thing that is interesting is that her moon is falling in, let me check. Yeah, her moon is falling in his 11th house, which is the house of gain. So this could show that, due to this relationship, he's going to have an increase in popularity, social status, money, career, everything. So yeah, that could make sense, actually. When you think about two celebrities in a relationship, yeah, that would make sense that they boost each other's reputations and careers. But yeah, this was pretty much the main ideas that I've come across. Wait, one more. Okay, last but not least, you have Jupiter. Her Jupiter in Libra is falling in his 4th house. So this shows that he perceives her as a source of great happiness. And again, this could really expand on his 4th house. So giving him a sense of overall happiness, joy, optimism, and a lot of stability in the home, a lot of happiness in the home, children as well, because Jupiter is the signifier of children. And maybe, again, this is gonna make him sound like a little gold digger, but I am seeing some recurring themes here where she's boosting his earning ability or his money. So Jupiter falling in his 4th house can show that he might get a bigger house because of her, or bigger vehicles. Somehow that area of the 4th house is being expanded, and also just more emotional security. Pretty much. All right, so this is what I see from the synastry overlays. And now checking out the composite chart. And I have to say, the composite chart is intense. That's the main word that comes to my mind. There are pluses and minuses, definitely, to this horoscope, to this composite chart. All right, let me start with the most positive things. Actually, let me start with the most negative thing, because the negative thing really stands out to me. The negative thing that I see is that the moon is only getting bad aspects in the composite chart, which is not good. Okay, you have Sun square Moon, you have Moon square Mercury, square Venus, square Mars. The most problematic of this, to me, is the Mars-Moon square. Especially coupled with that Mars-Rahu conjunction that they have in synastry. I'm really, I would love to be a fly on the wall in this relationship and see what their inner, private interactions look like, because this can really show a very hot-headed sort of relationship where, they can easily hurt each other's feelings and get into arguments and get super involved in each other's business. But yet again, because you have the moon square Mars, you have that contact between Mars and the moon. And I've talked about this also in the fertility boosting aspects, that oftentimes couples that get together almost on a subconscious level just to breed have these contacts between moon and Mars and or moon and Jupiter. They also have some minor aspect there, but since I am sticking mostly to Vedic astrology, I don't pay attention to the minor aspects in tropical astrology anymore. I don't even know what that is, like a semi-sextile, whatever it is. Let me check. So Jupiter and Virgo, yeah, I'm not even sure exactly what that is, but it's a very minor aspect, so I'm not going to take it into account as any contact between Jupiter and the moon. Wait, I take that back. They do have an aspect between Jupiter and the moon. They actually have Jupiter single-sidedly aspecting the moon. but that's a single-sided aspect, okay? So they do have some contact between Jupiter and the moon as well. So that's a positive aspect, actually, to have, because it might actually soothe that poor moon energy over there, because the moon is really not in a good state. And also, when you look at it from the Vedic perspective, because in the Vedic perspective, the orbs don't really matter. So you look by signs, right? So if two planets are in opposite signs, they are in opposition, even if there is a 20-degree orb difference, between them. So in this situation, you also have Moon opposite Saturn, which also complicates things a little bit. But at least if you have the single-sided Jupiter to Moon aspect, you also have the single-sided Rahu to Moon aspect, which is interesting. That's really breeding the materialism aspect there. And and Saturn being in opposition to the Moon, at least it's bringing, that emotional stability. And also Jupiter's aspect is soothing. It's bringing some optimism, some good faith, goodwill between each other, a willingness to forgive one another. That's very important. Tolerance. But otherwise with the Moon-Mars square, and the Moon-Mars square is a really tight one as well, just as the Sun-Moon square. This is very challenging in a long-term relationship. However, especially in the initial stages, breeds a lot of physical attraction, a lot of again, potentially even that subconscious desire to procreate on both of their parts. Because remember, the composite is basically created as at the middle point between their horoscopes, their individual horoscopes. So it's showing how they interact as a couple, as a one single organism, as so to speak, right? So they both take turns in playing each of these planets, right? So when you have the Moon-Mars square, it could be sometimes that she's the moon and he's the Mars. Sometimes he's the moon and she's the Mars, right? So in any case, the Moon-Mars square, like I said, could breed a lot of arguments, a lot of hurt feelings, a tendency to be really kind of rough with one another, not really paying attention to each other's emotional needs as much as you should. And so it's a tough one, honestly. And the Moon-Sun square is also, I wouldn't say it's the worst one to have, but it's not a great one to have either. To be fair, again, I can understand why this relationship is appealing to her, because again, looking at her horoscope, it seems to me like she's very kind of traditionalist, whether she says it or not. She's pretty traditionalist in what she looks for in a man. So having that contact between the sun and the moon, it's better than no contact between the sun and the moon. Let me put it like that. Because if you have the square, at least you have that kind of a feeling of, the male side and the female side. It's kind of like a clearer delineation between the roles, right? So there's like a female side, there's like a male side. So it's more leaning towards traditional gender roles. Even though, again, there could be conflict and both of them could take turns. So sometimes maybe she's the sun and he's the moon, right? So she could be like the voice of reason and he might come across as over emotional. And this would also kind of go hand in hand with what I've seen in the horoscope so far, in the Synastry, positive sides. Okay, so the moon situation is not great. I'm really curious to see how this progresses, okay? I would say the moon, to me, if I had to give it a score, I would say it's probably around 50%, the moon situation, okay? It could go either way, depending on how much they work on it, and how much they wanna make things work, basically. They do also have the Moon-Venus square, which is a good one to have, although it's actually pretty wide. So I don't even know if 100% I would take that into account. Having the square between Mercury and the moon at the very least would show that they are able to have conversations about their emotions at the very least. Even though they could be overly emotional when trying to explain each other. But anyway. Yeah, so I would say overall it's at about 50%. I can definitely see, again, very great attraction because you have, once again, not surprising because they have the double whammy. They have the Venus-Mars conjunction, very strong attraction. They have the Mercury-Mars conjunction. They have Mercury conjunct Venus. So there's definitely a lot of good communication happening. And, of course, last but not least, they also have the famous / infamous conjunction between Sun and Mercury in their composite. I have done a separate video entirely about this conjunction and talked about how common it is in modern day relationships, because this Mars Mercury conjunction shows they can have conversations about anything. They probably feel like they can complete each other's sentences. So overall, I would say, despite that Moon square Mercury, they actually have really good communication because there's a lot of conjunctions involving Mercury. So a lot of mental compatibility, a lot of friendship. And again, this would appeal to Nick more because he has Mercury as Darakaraka. So that means that he would be happy in this kind of a connection where there's a lot of open communication. There's a lot of friendship as well. So he feels he can talk about anything. However, I talked about that in the Mercury Sun video, that Mercury Sun can sometimes make people feel like they're more compatible than they actually are just because they think alike. But yeah. Not the case here to a large extent because they also have a lot of passionate aspects though. So they have the best of both worlds here. Except for that Moon situation, which is a little bit shaky, not rusty, shaky. And other great aspects. They have great aspects in terms of Sun and being conjunct Venus and Mars, and being conjunct, even though they are technically out of sign, it's a very tight orb actually between Venus, Sun, and Mars. So even though they are out of sign in this situation, I would take it into account because it's very tight. And also they have, I would say separately, I would take the Venus-Mercury conjunction. Actually, the Sun-Mercury conjunction is actually under question to me, because it's out of sign, and yeah, it is a pretty strong orb. I think it's what is it? Less than 3 degrees? Definitely less than 4 degrees, okay? So it could work, okay, as a conjunction. The conjunction between Mars and Mercury, I would mostly lean towards not taking it into account because it's pretty wide and it's out of sign. But the multiple conjunction between, so I would take these planets 3 by 3. So I would take Mercury, Venus, and Sun conjunct. I would take Venus, Sun, and Mars conjunct. And then of course Sun and Venus are conjunct, definitely. Yeah, so they do have, in any case, one thing that you will see right off the bat in many relationships that are long lasting, that are very purposeful, and generally where both people are very committed to one another and determined that they want to make it work, you will see these kinds of charts where there are a lot of conjunctions, all the planets are concentrated in 1 or 2 houses, or a lot of the planets, maybe not all of them. And they definitely have this. So they have, and also the fact that they have Rahu conjunct Jupiter is great for the composite chart. Again, falling in the 4th house, which is suggesting an increase in wealth, maybe increase in property, real estate, luck, vehicles, also happiness overall, because the 4th house is the house of happiness and children. Jupiter is also children, right? So overall, this is great. And having Saturn in the 6th house makes them a power couple kind of energy. So Saturn in the 6th house can mean that together they're very good at dealing with competition and enemies. They could be stronger together than they are separately. So that's great to have. Yeah, again, the Moon though is not in the best situation, but it's acceptable, okay? I would not call it a deal breaker situation exactly. And an added plus to this is that we have some Saturn aspects, but they're not very serious. So we have a lot of trines going on. Let me check here. yeah, we have Scorpio. So Saturn is in Scorpio. We do have a trine between Saturn and Venus and Mercury, even though it's pretty wide. I would not take into account the trine with the sun as it is said here in this calculator. I would not take that into account. But the trine with Venus and Mercury is there, and then you also have a single-sided aspect. First of all, you have the mutual aspect with the moon, and then you have a single-sided aspect of Saturn on Sun and Mars, which is adding more purpose and more stability and more discipline. Again, this is great for longevity. This is great for mutual commitment, for seriousness about the relationship. So yeah, this is great to see. Overall, the composite, I would say, does definitely look like the composite of a significant relationship for both of them. And last but not least, I wanted to show you this very Vedic concept of here it's called Ashtakut points. In other areas, I've seen it through all kinds of names, but this is a very traditional Vedic way of looking at compatibility. And I have to be honest, I don't always look at this as very important. In traditional Vedic astrology, it is seen as very important. It's like one of the first things that you check in order to see if two people are compatible. But in fact, I have talked about this in some videos, or I'm pretty sure that I mentioned it in some comments that I've made to people who have asked me about it, that I've seen relationships that are very long-lasting and relatively fulfilling that don't have this great score here, according to this Ashtakut matching system. And then I've also seen great, match points on this very Vedic system that have not been conducive to happy relationships. And in fact, even the traditional Vedic astrologers will say that it's not everything, okay? You do have to check other things, but it is still held in high regard by many. So I thought it would be fun to look at, because in more recent months, let me put it like that, and especially the past year or so, I have looked at it more. And some of them are things that I would have looked at anyway, irrespective of this particular table in this order, like the yoni compatibility. I've talked about this, which is shown here as intimate physical compatibility. And I talked about how this is important with respect to physical intimacy, but also intimacy in general, right? It's really important to have the yoni compatibility. It's also important to have the temperament compatibility between, I've talked about this in other videos, that there are 3 types of nakshatras. There are Rakshasa or demon nakshatras. There are Manushya or human nakshatras, and Devas or godlike nakshatras. And depending on especially your moon nakshatra, this is what most of these are taking into account, the moon situation, the moon nakshatras. You want to see, for instance, a woman, for instance, who is Rakshasa nakshatra, has her moon in Rakshasa, could not make a good match with a man who is Deva. Because the theory is that the Rakshasas are too harsh and too, agitated, aggressive, also maybe more materialistic. And it's too much to handle for a Deva. But again, a lot of these systems, as I've mentioned in other videos, they can be a little bit narrow-minded, and many of them are taking into account, traditional gender roles. So for instance, the idea that a Deva and a Nakshatra cannot go together is because women want men who are tougher than they are. So the theory is that if a man is a Deva and the woman is a Nakshatra, she might walk all over him or just aggravate him constantly. Whereas he will just see her as too harsh and too rough, and I don't know. But in reality, you might see situations where they work, depending on what else is going on there. And the main thing that is important, and the reason I started to use it more, is because I started to realize, especially when it came to the progeny, the nadi compatibility. I've actually seen this where couples have great, I actually have seen this in two couples that I've known who have had great synastry with respect to, like chart interaspects, composite chart compatibility. And however, they haven't had this nadi compatibility. So if you look at the table, you see like received and out of. So in these couples, they had 0 received out of a maximum of 8 compatibility with respect to progeny. And they have had serious problems. Like one of these couples have had a child who died. The other couple was not able to conceive, even though both of them have really wanted to have children, and eventually they just gave up. Even though at first I was kind of like, okay, this is antiquated and I'm not even sure if I should take it into account because, again, it's kind of chauvinistic sometimes. But with respect to some things, they get it right? So, and especially in this issue of progeny, I've seen it where, yeah, you could have like great compatibility, but if the nadi compatibility for progeny is pretty bad, it could actually show problems in conceiving, problems with the children, like children getting, and especially with respect to the health of the children, not so much like, behavioral problems or stuff like that. This is talking strictly of health, which is really interesting. And yeah, so generally, this is interesting because if you look at their compatibility, you see that they have a 0 for constructive ability, constructivism, society, and couple. So maybe this just shows that, they're not going to be feeling too drawn to, I don't know, building something major together, like getting involved in charities together. I don't know. I haven't studied if they're doing this to any extent. I haven't researched it. But this would suggest that this is not saying that they're not going to try, but it somehow suggests that they're not going to have luck together trying, let's say, to start projects together or to work together as a couple. This is how I would interpret it. And then you also have a 1.5 out of 3 for comfort, prosperity, and health. That's not so bad. Okay, 1.5 out of 3 is kind of like a minimum score. Generally, any area that is at least 50% of the maximum score is a good one. And if you look below, the calculator that I used said, the match has scored 24.5 points out of 36. I think the minimum is something like 18. Basically the middle of 36, meaning 36 divided by 2. But again, I've seen couples that have had maybe the bare minimum or even below the bare minimum on these systems, and they've been together for like ages, right? So nothing is really a deal breaker. It's all about how much are you willing to put up with in order to make the relationship work. Okay, so, and again, we see actually a confirmation here of what I've seen in the horoscope without looking at nakshatras or the Vedic. Also looked at nakshatras a little bit, but I'm trying to say is that you see again another strong confirmation that they have a very strong attraction and physical intimacy. Right, with the yoni compatibility, they get 3 out of 4. That's a very good compatibility. And they also have the Vashya compatibility, which is great. And they also have a good friendship compatibility, which is great again. And they have the temperament compatibility, maximum of 6 out of 6, which again, great for long-term relationships, right? So she's a Manusya and he's a Deva. Right. So this has been pretty much it, what I have wanted to say about this synastry. And I think I've gotten pretty in depth. I'm sure that, again, you could talk about any topic in astrology for ages, and and of course I could have gone even more in depth, but I'm going to stop here, and I hope that you have enjoyed it. This is the overall, compatibility analysis. I think it's a good overview. And if you have liked it, don't forget to please like the video, subscribe to my channel, click on the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video, and also comment in the comment section with anything you would like to share, or anything you would like to share, any comments you have. maybe ideas for future topics that you would like me to cover. And also, if you're interested in a private reading, you can check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. You can email me for pricing lists and reading options and other details. And also, you can check out the video description for more information on the membership options. And last but not least, I have a tarot channel, and I will be linking it in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. Go ahead and check it out. Maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.